And so as we begin to heal our chakras and, and address the notion that, there are past lives. So there's this element of spiritual and metaphysical healing that we have to sort of unpack as well. That's sort of run parallel to mediumistic development, being able to actively get access to the parts of me that's not just my body, which is my spirit, which is my energy system. It's a very powerful and very healing-based level of self-development.
Welcome to the multidimensional soul channel.
Were you on?
Koalas, kangaroos. Saw a kangaroo in town the other day.
Did you really?
No, not really. I saw one at work coming down. Down the road everywhere.
The wonders of being in the country. So welcome everyone. Philip and I are going to have a conversation about mediumship, and we're going to explore a few different themes related to mediumship and see where the conversation takes us.
Sounds wonderful, Leah. It's good to see you. I'm really excited about today. I'm really glad that we're going to be able to put this little video together and share some of our insights with them that may help them access more levels of their own mediumship development.
Perfect. So how did you come into mediumship?
Okay. So mediumship for me was not something that I had grown up with, nor was it an experience that I had sort of had deliberately. It sort of really happened by chance. Maybe about 10 years ago, I all of a sudden woke up one morning and started to notice these sort of multi-sensory abilities. And mediumship for me was really, the beginning of it was to get a sense of energy and begin to sort of see things that were not necessarily physically visible to the naked eye. And at the time, I didn't know it was mediumship, but I definitely knew that I had woken up one morning and there was this sort of significant onset of sight. And I know now that sight is called, being clairvoyant. But over the course of the last few years, as I've been developing my mediumship, I've met quite a few people that have a different story, and a story that is really explaining them growing up as a child or in their teenage years and beginning to develop a lot of these sort of multi-sensory abilities. Yeah, so I think mediumship, everyone's story is going to be quite different, but mine was just something that happened by chance and a lot later in life for me.
And would you say that there was a catalyst to you awakening in that way?
Yes, I had a recent death in the family at the time, and I look back and I suspect that I was at the time probably not able to process my grief. And, if I'm going to get a little bit technical, I think that my chakras somehow weren't very balanced at the time because I was overwhelmed by grief. I think that my spirit, the essence, sort of the divinity of my spirit, found itself that it had to show up, that it wasn't going to sort of be able to be in the background, in the peripheral. And I suspect it had been throughout the course of my life. And so the onset of an enormous amount of grief, the mechanics around my chakras where they may not sort of have been able to clearly shift or channel that type of energy. And I suspect that what occurred was my spirit body, the spirit that the essence of who it is that we are, that came to the forefront. And although I now know this in hindsight, at the time it did seem very, random and, as though it had no structure or formal process.
You mentioned your chakras perhaps not being in balance. How important is that for people wanting to develop their mediumship skills?
Yeah, look, I would say without being able to get a good sense of your chakras, and, I think it's also really important to be cognizant of having an energy body, because mediumship, for me anyhow, is having the ability to work with my energy system, and learning how to get access to my spirit, and thus the communicators in the non-visible world were not visible to the human eye. And so being able to work with my chakras, I had to become self-aware. I had to do some meditations and really learn to appreciate that what we know as our 7 main chakra system wasn't there just to help balance the flow of universal energy and into our meridians, but it was also really, it acts as a catalyst to building our spirit body, and really growing, the other aspects of our auric field and our etherical body. So the chakra system is incredibly important for mediumship. In my experience, though, when a lot of people begin to develop their mediumship, they're not always thinking that the chakras are important. They're developing set practices around sort of sitting daily in some type of meditative process, learning to become really aware of energy as it draws close. And for a lot of mediums that I've met in the last 10 years, chakras probably isn't even a term that they would bring up to a lot later in their own development.
So from what I'm understanding is that there was a lot of healing to be done in order for you to further develop your skills.
Yeah, definitely. So the healing had multiple levels to it. So there was a level of healing that was required around the human self and navigating grief, and what that meant to me on a personal level. There was also a lot of healing required. So our chakra systems in our 3D format, and this is something that you and I often talk about in the groups that we run. The systems often exist as a cone within our 3D format, and usually energy can build up quite a bit right in the base of the cone. And historically, that has a relationship to past lives. And so as we begin to heal our chakras and, and address the notion that, there are past lives. So there's this element of spiritual and metaphysical healing that we have to sort of unpack as well to get our chakras, quite balanced and to enable them to develop. And chakras, reach multiple levels of development that sort of run parallel to mediumistic development. So the chakras that, we're initially developing as cones, very 3D. But the chakras will reach a point of development where they will become less cone-like and more cylinder-based. And so as you progress in your metaphysical development, your chakras will exist as a cylinder. And that is more related to, your 4D and 5D metaphysical progression. But that is a part of healing, and it does inform your mediumship development. It's just another level of it.
So what's the role that mediumship plays in people's lives?
So I think for me, anyhow, the role that mediumship has played in my life is, it's really acted as a healing component. To know that, to come into an awareness that you're not just your body is a very powerful awareness to come into. And in order to engage the other side of life, this continuation of existence, which often most of us thinks can end when our physical body runs its course, but to come into a high level of awareness that life is continual. And as a result of that, you become, you get to have access to a lot of your intuitive abilities. So knowing that I'm not just my body, and then within that level of awareness, being able to actively get access to the parts of me that's not just my body, which is my spirit, which is my energy system. It's a very powerful and very healing-based level of self-development. And so I think people that come into a development of mediumistic abilities thus mediumship by extension, are really entering a level of higher ordered metaphysical development. And so for me, mediumship was really just a way through to getting to know my higher self, my soul, and also this incredible ability that all people will have that are intuitive and mediumistic to engage communicators from the other side of life. Now, it's a very powerful experience, Lee, and I know that you would know this personally. To be able to engage someone that has passed and release themselves from their physical form, but to engage them in a way that can communicate to their loved ones on this side that they're okay, that they're, that they're healing, that they're doing well, that there is an existence beyond this physical form. That can be very comforting, and sometimes life-saving for individuals on this side of life. So I think, being able to be a medium and being able to work towards developing your mediumship development and qualities is inevitably tied up with your own spiritual development. And and there's a word that's often used in a spiritual community, and they use the term ascension. So as you develop mediumistically and you provide help and support and love to the other side of life, you're in essence developing your spirit and your spirit body, and that is helping you become more aware and ascend into a higher version of you.
You mentioned like engaging with spirit and opening up the possibility to provide healing. We've seen it in our groups and also in readings, that there's incredible healing on both sides of life, on this side and on the other side. Are there any examples that you can think of just off the top of your head?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a reading that, I was at the college, the Arthur Findlay College, quite a few years back, and it's a college where, individuals who have psychic abilities or mediumship qualities, or just individuals that are intuitive and that want to get to become more developed with their intuition. They go and they train, and it's in the UK. And I was doing a practice reading at the time, and for me personally, there was a person who was doing the reading for me, and I was the recipient. And it hadn't been long since my mother had passed, and so I was aware that I was depressed, and there was quite a lot of grief that I was experiencing. But being able to have someone communicate with me and say to me on a personal level, I'm aware that your mother had a nickname for you, and this was the nickname, and I'm also aware that you had this many siblings, and this is the relationship that you had with your mother and your family system. And so to receive such intimate and private information in a very safe setting, it really helped me not feel alone. It really helped me feel seen. That low mood, that tearfulness, the sadness that had consumed me for many months was lifted in that moment where I knew and felt really the essence of the spirit of my mother come through this incredible person that was just a practicing student like myself. There was a sense of this enormous lifting of what felt to me at the time like a depressive experience. And so, I suspect that's not always the case with everyone, but very personally for me, having lost my mother and being consumed by grief at the time, and then having someone bring forward, a story that only my mother was aware of, and to share that with me intimately, it really provided me with proof of continued life, and that also, that my mother was okay. Then she was also aware of my struggle, and that I now was okay. So mediumship on a very personal level, for me, provided a lot of healing around not being alone, not feeling isolated, particularly in my grief. So that was very powerful to experience.
And I would imagine it would lift a certain level of fear around people who perhaps even fear death, knowing that there is an afterlife and our spirits do continue on, that there isn't an end would bring comfort to a lot of people, perhaps if there is an intense fear around dying or losing someone. Have you found that that's been your experience with working with people?
Yes, absolutely. And, there is this term that's often referred to, particularly in counselling circles, they refer to death anxiety. And I thought it was a really bizarre name, but once I became familiar with the term, it in essence is really, it's this existential form of anxiety that most people have around the idea of death being finite.
Mm.
And that can be really frightening. And so on my own personal journey, there was an enormous amount of power on a personal level experiencing, the other side of life and the communication that I was able to center in and feel quite heard and sort of held as well. But knowing that death wasn't finite, that life is continual, it gave me on this side of life more hope. And I think, when people experience death or grief in a family system or even just trauma, Leah, and often when people are trying to become more self-aware, hope is such an essential ingredient. And, we all need hope. We need hope to get through the struggles in our relationships. We need hope to get through our children developing and struggling in their own personal sort of relationships. And so it's no different when we come to the idea of people that we love passing away, that it's really important that there is hope, that for them, but also for us and our existence.
Mm. And on the other side of that same coin, what about, what advice would you offer for people perhaps that are curious about the whole mediumship topic, but perhaps have some fear about connecting to spirit? Because there's been so much, the cliches of haunted ghost stories and that, that we all kind of grow up with. And really, when we're in a mediumship environment, it has nothing to do with fear, really. It's all about unconditional love. How would you advise people who perhaps have some fear around connecting with spirit?
I would suggest that they acknowledge the fear and that they accept it, that it's a very normal and healthy part of this human experience. So I think that it's really important, well, at least that I don't advocate to those that experience fear to dismiss it. And, it's almost like this dichotomy that sort of we're presented with as we try to nurture the mediumistic self, is that we've existed in this human embodiment and moved forward and seen things and approached life from a human perspective, but all of a sudden we become aware of his spiritual self. And that can be incredibly frightening. And the notion of death is an ending, and we're being actively alive and experiencing a human existence requires, constant beginnings, as a child, as a teenager, finishing year 12, going to university, in a relationship, being partnered, becoming a parent, a grandparent. Human life is full of so many beginnings. And then the idea that it's also about an ending can create this sort of disconnect, which is really can create a lot of fear. But I think knowing that we are spirit, and that a part of our development, our personal development, if we choose for it to be, a part of our personal development is going to require us to surrender and to know that there has to be room to both aspects of self, and that this human life is so real, but also the spirit world is equally as real. And in my experience, the fear is absolutely there initially, but in order to move beyond it, there's a requirement to be able to surrender. And one of the ways that you can surrender is to trust. You can also learn how to acquire certain characteristics around sitting in gratitude, gratitude and service are closely aligned. So it's really this transition that an individual needs to go through that will help them navigate fear. But I think the celebration of life and continued life will supersede the anxiety and the initial fear that we step forward with. And just as a side note as well, Leah, often when we begin to give thought to spirit, it can be confusing thinking that both worlds exist together at the same time. When we talk about ghosts and we talk about spirit, even if we talk about communication from the other side of life, we're really in essence talking about energy and consciousness. So there are multiple levels and layers to breaking down not just your mediumship development, but also the challenges that you've explained around feeling fear and the idea of some sort of preset beliefs. So developmentally, I think that the whole process of mediumship and embracing your own personal development as a medium, it does sort of run parallel and run side by side with your human development. But fear is very normal, and I would really support those that are listening today to not dismiss your fear, because your fear in a way has helped you navigate your human existence. So you would really want to honor it while alongside developing a whole set of skill sets that can help you surrender, sit in gratitude and trust.
And you mentioned something there about, them running parallel, like our personal growth and our spiritual growth. Could you talk a little bit more?
Yeah, so when we exist as the human beings that we are, we often undergo constant levels of development and growth, and that can look different for many of us. And sometimes our personal growth can be centered around addressing trauma. It can be centered around changing and accessing, different perspectives in life, different relationships, jobs, employment, friendships, and really navigating the parts of our human life that we find challenging and pushing through it. And so that definitely underpins the idea that we are experiencing growth, personal growth from a human development. There's also growth that, is spiritual growth, Leah, and that is very much centered around becoming conscious and self-aware that you're not just your body. And, some would suggest that if you exist from a soul perspective, momentarily at least, you would also understand that you're possibly not your body at all. However, that's another conversation, and there's quite a lot to the idea that you're not your body. But depending on the perspective or the context in which sort of the discussions are being had, that's also another aspect of truth. So this personal growth we experience along our human development is usually really tied up with addressing trauma and the challenges and the patterns of behavior that no longer serve us. As we do that, we are releasing ourselves in many ways from these metaphorical chains, these systems that have kept us stuck. And so often as you begin to address and release yourself historically from trauma, you will notice that there'll be a shift of energy. You'll feel a lot lighter. You'll be able to become, there'll be a lot more room for you to have other thoughts. You'll possibly acquire other practices that may be more meditative. You'd increase your level of self-care. This shift in how you treat yourself and how you navigate your personal development can act as a catalyst for you to become more spiritual. It can act as a catalyst for you to become more conscious and more awoken, to the notion that you're not just a physical human being. And so your constant healing and your self-development will continually run along your spiritual development, your level of self-care. Yeah, and there is really there's no end result. There is no end game. It's just constantly continued awareness and development, and that, it is presented on multiple levels.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that. through my journey, the more personal development work, the healing, clearing of trauma, it's almost like layers of density kind of come off you. And like you said, it leaves more space for, all these other gifts to come in, our ability to see and hear and feel spirit, and also more of a connection to our own intuition, our guides, our spirit team. And I feel like they're almost on the other side cheering us on. And that's been really important. I know from, our conversations for both of us in our own spiritual development. Was there anything else you wanted to say in connection to, perhaps our higher purpose?
Yeah, look, I think you touched on some really important points in your reflection just there. And, there's spirit guides and there is spirit teams. And so this is such an important part of our mediumship development. And, we're not alone from a spirit perspective. And the mediumship development will and does require us to become more aware of energy, more self-aware of not just our energy system, but other energy that comes into our auric field. I know that our goal has been for quite a few years is to help mediums, or developing mediums at the very least, to discover that their development is just constant, and that if once they're able to engage their own sort of spirit, their spirit teams and communication on the other side, that they can really help, make a difference in other people's lives, but also in their own life. And it's this difference, Leah, that people can make in their own life that really aligns to this notion of purpose. And often people will query, at the very least internally, if not asking other people, what could my purpose be? Why am I here? Why would I birth into this existence? And for so many, rightly so, it's such an important question, particularly if people have a history of trauma. What's the reason that I've endured all this trauma? Surely there has to be something greater in my existence. And often if they ask the question and they listen very carefully, they will get the answers. And these answers are coming from this otherworldly plane. It's this plane of spirit in which, we have family, we have team members, spirit team members, spirit guides, this incredibly, team that are ready to show up from an energy perspective and really help us understand our purpose. My thoughts around life purpose and mediumship development, for me, they're both intertwined. Also, a human being's personal development, addressing trauma and healing. I think all three cross over. And this is what makes us incredible, what makes the human experience so incredible, to know that there are so many levels of development. But I do want to say, though, is we do need support. We need support to address trauma, whether it means going to a counsellor or even to a friend. In the same way, you need support from a mediumship perspective. You would join a group, you would go and source mentorship, or you'd sit in a mediumship circle, which, is a group that would meet weekly, and there would, sort of be a mentor that would help develop your qualities. So being involved in mediumship development will require a sense of sort of being responsible.
You mentioned, joining maybe a mediumship group or a circle. How has that impacted your mediumship development?
Significantly. So we have a mediumship platform, we being, that the multidimensional soul platform, which really is a sort of a beginner's platform for mediums to begin to be supported, to understand energy and intuition. But it's incredibly important for me. If I didn't have other mentors or other groups to join, I would not have understood the idea of spirit, or my spirit, my intuition, and my spirit guides. And I suspect that human part of me that was navigating my grief and my trauma possibly could have been stuck, and that fear may have been an obstacle for me So joining other groups that are quite supportive, I think, are essential for mediumship development. But, trust your intuition. You have to get the right feel for the group. You want to ensure that the people that you sit with have integrity, that there's a set of sort of ethics that can safeguard your development. Yeah, that would be my view around joining groups.
Great advice. And as we wind up this conversation, just let people know about the platform that we're running. And you did mention it is a good place for beginners to begin to explore a lot of these topics. And also, it's not just about mediumship for us, is it? It's more, we take a more holistic approach. We offer workshops on past lives, on healing. Trauma is a really big part of all of that, in both of our work. Is there anything else that you could share with everyone?
Yeah, I think you explained what's offered really well, Leah, but there is probably one other aspect, and this is probably for those that are experiencing a level of conscious expansion, maybe a bit different and beyond mediumship as itself, and that's around the proposition that there are other extensions to our body that's holographic in nature, and thus the term the multidimensional soul, and that our body is has a multidimensional paradigm to it. And so the mediumship is very much a stepping stone into multiple levels of metaphysical development. But you're correct, our platform isn't just for mediumship. It does also encompass, healing and spirit work, past life work. We do run trauma groups as well, because that is clearly what you and I do in our own private practice. We work with trauma as practitioners. But yeah, and those that are interested in the idea that your body is multidimensional in nature and that there's holographic anatomy, that's an extension of our physical body. If that's of interest to anyone, I would definitely encourage people to definitely click onto the site and read up a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I'll leave all of that information in the description below. And thanks, guys, for listening. And if you have any comments, please leave them, or any questions even that you'd like Phillip or I to answer. Please leave your questions in the comments, and we'll endeavour to answer as many of those as we can. Thank you.